Baku, a breath to spark the human heart. G'day there, friends and family. I'm Mark Philpott, and welcome to this episode of the Baku podcast, where it's my mission to share what I'm learning about living an inspired life filled with joy and creativity. Are you an artist? Whew, that's a big question to ask somebody, especially somebody who you've just met. I want to share a little story about what happened to me about a week ago. I was out to buy a rolling pin from the local homewares store here in Torquay, and being Torquay, the homewares store was shut at 1:30 in the afternoon, closed for a bit of a long lunch, set on the door back at 2. So rather than going home, I thought I'd just drop into a local skate park, go for a quick roll, and come back to grab my rolling pin. Within a couple of minutes of being at the skate park, I took a bit of a stack on my hip, which meant skateboarding had come to a finish for the day. I thought, why not just pop into the local art gallery, the Hoop Art Gallery, run by the Surf Coast Shire there in Torquay, where local artists display their work, and just check out what's on. So I wandered in and took a little look around the exhibition. Lots of work by local artists there, beach scenes, prints, paintings, all manner of sculptors and different bits and pieces. And the main exhibition was a over 50s glamour photography exhibition, which wasn't quite my cup of tea, but we're all into different things, so that's okay. Spent a few minutes there walking around, killing a bit of time while I waited for the homewares store to open back up so I could grab a rolling pin. And on the way out, the lovely lady sitting at the desk named Bonner Jones had a little bit of a chat and asked me, "Are you an artist?" This question hit me in the guts, actually, and wasn't quite sure how to answer. If I'm being mindful of my response in the moment, there was a bit of a reaction. There was a conflict inside me. Part of me wanted to just say yes, but another part of me wasn't sure that I was worthy. Had I earned the right to claim this title, even in the presence of a complete stranger? So I answered the only way I could, with some sort of humility and as close as I could to what is an honest truth. And I said, well, I make stuff. Bonner laughed and said, it's a tough question to answer, isn't it? So I asked her, do you make stuff? Not wanting to put her under the same sort of pressure. And she said, yes, I'm a printmaker, and she makes this awesome prints in a workshop with an etching press, all sorts of underwater sea creatures. And we had a great old chinwag about psychology and art and the state of affairs in the world. But it got me thinking as I walked out of there, why is this such a difficult question to answer? Are you an artist? How does that question land for you? If you sit quietly and ask yourself, are you an artist? And I'm talking artist with a capital A. How does that land? How does your body react? Are there any sensations or thoughts or pictures that come to mind? Is it easy to give it a resounding yes, or is it a little more difficult? So why is this important? Because the titles we're able to accept, the roles we're able to assume, have a significant impact on the way that we behave, what we're free to do with our lives and our time. In our culture, we've come up with a lot of euphemisms for artists. We call people creatives or creators, designers, makers, because a lot of people have a hard time accepting the identity of an artist, while those who do, we tend to put up on a pedestal. But I'm curious about your reaction to that question, because the way that our body responds, the thoughts and feelings that come to mind when we hear this question, give us a little glimpse and an insight into the stories about what it means to be an artist that we've accepted from our family, schooling, from the culture around us. What makes somebody an artist? Is it the gear they use? Is it the beautiful studio space that they have access to? Or perhaps it's their education. Do you need a degree? Or do you need to be particularly influential, powerful, famous? What is it that makes somebody an artist? And are these stories true anyway? See, I think the resistance within me, the conflict between wanting to just say yes and not being able to own it in that moment, had a lot to do with some of the stories that I grew up with. And asking ourselves this question can really shine a light on some of those insecurities that we may have inadvertently adopted, and even some of those preconceived ideas about what it would take to own this particular part of our identity. Because our identity isn't any one thing. I think a healthy identity can expand to assume a whole lot of different roles and titles over time. An artist is just one of those titles. Growing up, my grandmother, Nanny Avril, was an artist. She was the only artist that I knew, and hence my idea of what it meant to be an artist was heavily influenced by that experience. As a 2 or 3 year old, I'd spend hours while my mum was at work in the back room at my grandparents' place on White's Lane in Glen Waverley, while my grandmother taught art lessons to a group of friends. So to me, an artist was a lady in her 60s or perhaps older who did oil paintings based on photographs taken from newspapers and magazines so that they could be sold at local primary school art shows, donated to church fetes, and so they could drink lots of cups of tea and eat Arnott's bickies. And the one thing that stood out to me was the importance of technical proficiency. Can you accurately duplicate the pictures from the magazines and the newspapers using your paintbrush? And certainly now on reflection, I think technical proficiency has its place. It's important to develop the craft of whatever particular medium you would like to utilize as you create your art. And the skill of duplicating images as a visual artist is a bit like developing your vocabulary as a speaker or a writer, or like learning scales on a musical instrument. It's part of the artist's journey to develop the vocabulary, but being an artist invites us to move beyond simply being technically proficient in reproducing existing vocabulary. It invites us to move beyond the craft. In his work, The Creative Act, Rick Rubin, who is everywhere at the moment, says that if you begin with a question and use it to guide an adventure of discovery, that's the work of an artist. Rules direct us to average behaviours, and if we're aiming to create works that are exceptional, most rules don't apply. Average is nothing to aspire to. And as I reflect on the importance of technical proficiency now as an adult, I think it's easy to be swept up in pursuing skills, in pursuing technical proficiency, in continuing to evolve and expand on your vocabulary. But this isn't the crucial aspect of what it means to be an artist, which is simply to be curious, to start with a question, and to go on a bit of an adventure of discovery. And that's what leads us to creating something new. Now, you're welcome to disagree at this point. If you think, no, technical proficiency is the standard for a capital A artist, that's fine. But an example that comes to mind of somebody who wasn't terribly concerned with technical proficiency is my son when he was 2 or 3 years old. One of my favourite things during summer was watching him out in the backyard with his paintbrushes and an easel, a few buckets of paint, probably in the nude, as he splashed his paint around on the page to create his artworks. He was completely enraptured by the process. There was paint all over his body, and and the paper in front of him, because most good artists do paint in the nude, I've heard. And he didn't have technical proficiency beyond perhaps dunking paintbrushes and splattering paint. However, there was a curiosity about what would happen as he mixed colours and laid things up that is very hard to be in touch with for us as adults. So I've got to ask myself, is my attachment to technical proficiency helpful, or does it hold me back? Some of the artists whose work I admire, and if you listen to a lot of pop songs, the technical proficiency doesn't seem to matter much. What matters is it honest, and is it coming from a place of curiosity and discovery? And what are we curious about and discovering anyway? I'd argue that most art that connects with people comes from a place of self-inquiry. How am I feeling about this subject or this topic today? And what is it, using whatever skills and resources that are available to me, what is it that I'd like to give birth to today? As I've been exploring art, I've been making little woodblock prints in the garage using some carving tools to carve up plywood and then print it onto paper using inks. And as I've been making these artworks, I've been exploring different artists who I'm simply curious about, and watching bunches of YouTube videos on the life of artists and how they came about their particular practice. And I heard a line that resonated with me this week, and it is that art is about creativity and imagination determining the outcome. Again, it resonates with Rubens' perspective that the art occurs when we simply give ourselves over to a sense of discovery and adventure. So how does this apply to adults like myself who are perhaps in the middle of their midlife crisis type years, who are looking to reclaim their inner artist, to actually scratch that creative itch and be able to move into that part of ourselves that perhaps hasn't had a lot of airtime over the years? So I want to leave you with 3 takeaways from today's ramblings that perhaps you'll be able to incorporate into your journey as a budding creative artist. And number 1 is there's a symbiotic relationship between the craft, between developing the skills, your vocabulary, and making the art. Venturing into the unknown to do something brand new. Personally, as I mentioned, I can easily get caught up in the learning experience, but I'm discovering that you'll never have enough skills. You'll never be technically proficient enough. So you might as well use the skills you've got to make something unique, to make your art. Number 2, allow your identity to expand and incorporate more labels. I resisted labels for a long time. When I started working as a chaplain, I resisted the identity of a chaplain. I simply said I was doing chaplaincy. Similarly, as a teacher, I was teaching, but I wasn't really tied down to the idea of being a teacher. And I think this resistance to accepting labels may be because none of those labels are really central to who I am. And perhaps if you've had a hard time accepting labels in your career, in your life, it's because while you can incorporate doing all those things into your life, perhaps there's something more central to who you are. So whether artist is central to your identity or whether it's something on the peripheries, I'd invite you to just think about your identity in terms of expanding to include and incorporate more and more titles, roles, and labels. And thirdly, as you go out into this week and you sit with the question, are you an artist? I'd invite you to just let go of the stories, including this one. Because the stories can be helpful for a short period of time, and particularly if they build up our ego to move in a particular direction. But those stories can also be quite limiting. They can hold us back from reaching our true potential, from exploring our creativity and bringing new things into the world. So go into this week and sit with that question. Are you an artist? Get quiet and notice your response. How does your body react? Any thoughts and stories that come to mind, and simply let them go. And if you really want to make some of your friends uncomfortable this week, ask them that question, just out of the blue, doing the dishes together. Are you an artist? And see how they respond. It's been a pleasure chatting with you this week. May you go out and make your art with confidence and enthusiasm this week. Baku.